Los Angeles's famed evening glow could not mask the growing unease spreading across the city. The relentless wildfires that had ravaged the region in recent weeks had drawn the attention of not just California, but the entire world. For most, these fires were seen as the inevitable result of global warming and poorly managed forest policies. But for Mel Gibson, these events pointed to a much deeper and more complex truth. Inside the television studio, a heavy silence hung in the air. Caroline Hart, a seasoned journalist with the poise of a professional, couldn't ignore the weight of what Mel Gibson was about to reveal on tonight's program. Over the years, Mel had become one of Hollywood's most controversial figures. However, tonight, he wasn't appearing as an actor or director, but as a survivor of the fires and a man determined to uncover the truth behind the tragedy. Mel, first of all, thank you for joining us tonight, Caroline began, her tone carrying a subtle formality. The recent wildfires have deeply affected us all, but you claim there's much more to these events than meets the eye. Could you elaborate on your allegations? Mel fixed his gaze momentarily on the camera, his look creating the feeling that he was speaking directly to each viewer. Caroline, he began, his voice calm but resolute, these fires aren't just natural disasters, they're carefully orchestrated events serving a purpose. Caroline hesitated, sensing the gravity of his statement. These weren't claims to be taken lightly. Could you clarify? What do you mean by orchestrated? Mel took a deep breath. First, we need to examine how these fires started and where they were most concentrated. These aren't just areas prone to wildfires. They're some of the most valuable land in the state. Places like Malibu, Topanga, and Pacific Palisades. For years, these areas were off limits for large-scale developments due to strict environmental regulations. But now these regulations are being systematically removed in the wake of these fires. Caroline furrowed her brow. Are you suggesting that someone intentionally caused these fires? Not exactly, Mel replied, tilting his head slightly. The fires may not have been directly set by a single individual, but I believe the conditions for them to occur were deliberately created. And at the end of it all, there are people who stand to make a lot of money from this. A murmur rippled through the studio. An invisible tension thickened the air. While Mel's words might have sounded like a conspiracy theory to some, they struck a chord with others. Caroline searched for a way to delve deeper into these extraordinary claims. Mel, do you have any evidence to back up these allegations? She asked, her pen moving quickly across her notepad as she awaited his answer. Mel gestured to the screen behind him, where images began to appear. Maps, scorched landscapes, and satellite footage displayed in quick succession. Pay attention to the areas most affected by these fires. Before the blazes, these regions were protected under strict environmental laws. But after the fires, emergency declarations allowed those same areas to be rapidly rezoned for development. Did you know that in some cases, local governments made these decisions before the fires were even fully contained? Caroline couldn't respond directly to the question. The information Mel was presenting wasn't something the average person could easily access. That's a very serious accusation, she said, pausing. How did you begin investigating these events? Mel smiled faintly, though it was a smile tinged with irony. It started as I watched my home burn, he said, his voice faltering slightly. The place where I lived for years, where my children grew up, everything was gone in a matter of hours. But instead of just mourning what I'd lost, I started questioning why it happened. And that's when I realized these fires weren't just a disaster, they were part of something much bigger. Caroline listened intently, absorbing every word. She could sense the pain and anger in Mel's voice. But beneath those emotions, there was also an unwavering determination. He wasn't just seeking answers about why his house was destroyed. He was on a mission to uncover the truth behind the entire catastrophe. The studio lights cast a sharp glow on Mel Gibson, who sat unmoving, his hands clasped tightly. His face bore the strain of someone who had spent countless sleepless nights seeking answers. The audience, both in the studio and watching from home, could feel the gravity of his words hanging in the air. Mel, Caroline's voice softened, her journalistic composure giving way to a tone of genuine concern. This is deeply personal for you, but you've also suggested that this issue goes far beyond your own loss. You mentioned earlier that certain individuals or groups might be benefiting from these fires. Can you elaborate on that? Mel leaned forward, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial tone. Follow the money, he said simply. In every disaster, there are people who suffer, and there are people who profit. These fires are no exception. With a wave of his hand, the screen behind him lit up with images of corporate logos, land development plans, and government documents. Take a look at this, he began, pointing to a map that displayed various regions affected by the fires. These areas were under strict environmental protection laws. Building on this land was either heavily restricted or outright banned. Now, after the fires, those restrictions are being lifted under the guise of rebuilding. Coincidence? Caroline's eyes narrowed as she studied the map. But these fires are enormous. They're unpredictable. Are you suggesting that someone could orchestrate something of this magnitude? Mel nodded grimly. I know it sounds far-fetched, but think about it. It doesn't take a single mastermind. All it takes is the right conditions. Dry brush, poor forest management, and perhaps a few well-placed sparks. Once the fire starts, nature takes over. And while the rest of us are focused on the destruction, some are already planning what comes next. The audience gasped as another slide appeared, showing the names of real estate developers, insurance companies, and even private equity firms. These are the people who stand to gain the most, Mel continued. Massive payouts from insurance claims, lucrative contracts for rebuilding, and new opportunities to develop land that was once untouchable. Caroline interjected, her tone skeptical but curious. These are serious accusations. Do you have any direct evidence tying these groups to the fires? I'm working on it, Mel admitted, his jaw tightening. But there are patterns that can't be ignored. For instance, did you know that some of these companies started acquiring land in fire-prone areas months before the fires began? And what about the politicians who've been quietly rolling back environmental protections? They're all connected. The tension in the room was palpable. Caroline, sensing the need to ground the discussion, shifted the focus. You've made some compelling points, but these are still circumstantial. What do you hope to achieve by bringing this to light? Mel's eyes burned with intensity as he answered. I want accountability. People have lost their homes, their lives, their memories. And for what? So someone else can turn a profit? I want the world to see the truth, to demand answers. Because if we don't, this will keep happening. Caroline nodded, her expression solemn. And what's your next step? Mel hesitated for a moment before responding. I've started working with a group of independent investigators, journalists, environmentalists, even a few whistleblowers. Together, we're piecing together the puzzle, and when we have enough, we're going public. The studio erupted in applause, the audience moved by Mel's determination. Yet beneath the applause, there was an undercurrent of unease. If what he was saying was true, it meant that no one was safe, not from the fires, and not from the forces that fueled them. As the program ended and the cameras powered down, Mel remained seated, his thoughts racing. He knew the road ahead would be treacherous, filled with resistance and danger. But he also knew he couldn't turn back. Too much was at stake. The conference room buzzed with tension as Mel entered, his leather jacket slung over his shoulder. Seated around the oval table were his newfound allies, a group of investigative journalists, environmental activists, and data analysts. Each of them carried an air of quiet determination, their laptops open and papers scattered. Glad you could make it, Mel, said a wiry man with sharp glasses. His name was Ethan, a journalist who had earned a reputation for exposing corporate corruption. We've been compiling everything we've got. The picture's becoming clearer, but there are gaps we need to fill. Mel nodded, taking a seat. Let's see what we've got so far. Ethan stood, clicking on a projector. The screen filled with a web of connections, names, companies, and shell corporations. Here's what we know. Several major land development firms, insurance conglomerates, and even hedge funds have shown unusual activity in fire-prone regions. We've traced their movements back months before the fires began. Land acquisitions, lobbying efforts to weaken environmental laws, and even suspicious contracts with fire management services. The room fell silent as Ethan clicked to the next slide. A series of emails and text messages leaked by an anonymous whistleblower. The messages revealed discussions about maximizing opportunities post-disaster and leveraging fire-damaged zones for urban expansion. This is explosive, Mel said, his voice low. But it's still not enough. We need something irrefutable. A smoking gun. That's where I come in. The voice came from the back of the room, where a woman in her late 30s leaned against the wall. Her name was Sophia, a former insider in the insurance industry who had turned whistleblower after uncovering unethical practices. Sophia stepped forward, placing a USB drive on the table. This contains internal memos from one of the largest insurance firms. They show how they adjusted their policies in fire-prone areas just before the disasters. Premiums were hiked, coverage was slashed, and claims were denied en masse after the fires. They knew what was coming. Mel's jaw tightened as he picked up the drive. "How did you get this?" Sophia smirked. "Let's just say I had some unfinished business with my former employer. They think they can bury the truth, but they underestimated me." Ethan interjected, his tone cautious. "This is good, but it's risky. If we publish this without airtight evidence, they'll bury us in lawsuits." Mel leaned back, his mind racing. "Then we need to be strategic. We'll need more than just documents. We need witnesses, people who can testify about what they've seen, what they've been ordered to do." "That's easier said than done," Sophia said. "Most people are too scared to come forward. These corporations don't just fight back. They destroy lives." Mel's gaze hardened. "Then we give them a reason to step out of the shadows. If we can show them we're serious, that we're willing to fight, they might just join us." Over the next few weeks, the group worked tirelessly, piecing together their evidence. They reached out to firefighters, former employees of the implicated companies, and even local residents who had lost everything in the fires. One of the most shocking testimonies came from a former fire management contractor who claimed he had been ordered to prioritize corporate interests over community safety. "They didn't care about saving homes," he said during a clandestine meeting. "They cared about protecting assets that were insured by their friends in the industry." As the evidence mounted, so did the danger. Mel began noticing cars parked outside his home at odd hours. Ethan's email was hacked, and Sophia received anonymous threats warning her to stay out of things she didn't understand. But the group pressed on, undeterred. They knew they were on the verge of something big, something that could shake the foundations of power. One night, Mel found himself sitting alone in his study, staring at the USB drive Sophia had given him. The weight of the truth bore down on him. He thought of the countless lives ruined by the fires, the families torn apart, the dreams reduced to ash. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. It was a message from Ethan. "We've got what we need. Meet us at the safe house." Mel grabbed his jacket and headed out into the night, his heart pounding. The stakes had never been higher. Little did he know, the greatest battle was yet to come. The safe house was a modest cabin tucked away in the foothills, surrounded by dense trees. As Mel approached, he noticed the faint glow of light through the curtained windows. The air was thick with anticipation. He pushed open the door to find Ethan, Sophia, and the rest of the team huddled around a table strewn with documents, laptops, and coffee cups. "We're ready," Ethan said, looking up. Sophia handed Mel a printed copy of their report. "This is it. We've compiled everything. Documents, testimonies, financial records. It's airtight." Mel scanned the report, his eyes lingering on key sections. The evidence painted a damning picture. Corporations deliberately profiting from disaster, manipulating policies, and exploiting communities. "This will blow the lid off everything," Mel said. "But how do we ensure it reaches the right people?" Ethan grinned. "We've partnered with some independent media outlets and whistleblower platforms. They're ready to publish the report simultaneously. But there's one more step." Sophia nodded. "We need a public face, a voice that can rally people, make them care. That's you, Mel." Mel hesitated. "Me? I'm not a journalist or an activist. I'm just a guy who's angry about what's happening." "Exactly," Sophia said. "You represent the people who've been hurt by this, the ones who've lost everything. Your story is what will make this real for them." The plan was set in motion. Ethan and the others worked through the night, finalizing the report and coordinating with their media partners. Meanwhile, Mel prepared his statement. By morning, everything was ready. The report was uploaded to secure servers, Time to go live across multiple platforms. Mel stood in front of a camera, a makeshift studio set up in the safe house. He took a deep breath as the countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The red light blinked on. Good morning. My name is Mel Carter. I'm a firefighter, a son, a friend, and someone who's seen the devastating effects of the recent wildfires firsthand. But today, I'm here to tell you that these fires were not just natural disasters. They were a result of greed, corruption, and negligence. For months, my team and I have been investigating the truth behind these fires. What we've uncovered is horrifying. Corporations putting profits over people, manipulating policies, and even prioritizing their own assets over the safety of our communities. This isn't just about the fires. It's about the systems that allowed this to happen, the systems that continue to fail us. But we have the power to change that. Together, we can hold these corporations accountable. We can demand justice for the lives lost, the homes destroyed, and the communities shattered. The full report is being released now. I urge you to read it, to share it, and to stand with us. This fight isn't over, but with your help, we can make sure it ends the right way. Thank you. The video went live alongside the report. Within hours, it was everywhere, trending on social media, covered by news outlets, and discussed in communities across the country. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people came forward with their own stories, adding to the growing wave of outrage. Protests erupted, demanding accountability from the implicated companies. But the fight was far from over. As Mel and his team braced for the inevitable legal battles and smear campaigns, they found strength in the unity of the people. One evening, as Mel stood outside the safe house, watching the sun set over the hills, Sophia joined him. "You did good, Mel," she said. "We all did," he replied, "but this is just the beginning." Sophia smiled. "True, but beginnings are important, and this one feels different." Mel nodded, a sense of hope stirring within him. The flames of corruption had been exposed, and though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew one thing: they wouldn't stop until justice was served.